Hi folks, two chaps, many cultures. It is Friday, episode 184. Welcome along to the show. Today, it's kind of like I guess, specific to the event. Sometimes we talk about events and respond to them in real time. And today we heard the sad news of the passing of Prince Philip in the UK, and someone who has really held as part of the monarchy of the UK, a very, very powerful role, and an influential role, but from a supportive standpoint. And I guess we're going to look at the view of monarchs and royalty and how it influences different cultures and how they come about. And we're just going to play around with the topic. Stick around. Welcome back.
Welcome, everybody. The number one show where the co-host can go missing for a few seconds because the internet has better ideas. Welcome, Friday's edition, Two Chaps, Many Cultures. And I don't know what Brett said earlier. I'm sure it was good.
Well, it was obviously that impactful that you thought, wow, this just blew my mind. I'm just going to have to go and take a break and think about it. Well, maybe that and I never say anything as impactful of that. Yes, but welcome, everybody. As I mentioned in the intro, that, yes, this is a day where we've heard the news of the passing of Prince Philip, somebody who is very influential, if not directly influential in terms of his role in the royal family in the UK. But it's truth to be said that there is a long history of monarchs and royalty in human history, and we're just going to kind of dig into it today. We're just going to what our observations are from two different sides of the coin, kind of generally different sides of the coin. Me being a child and a product of a culture that is still somewhat not governed, but influenced by the UK royal family. So put it that way. The Commonwealth
royalist.
Yes. The part of the Commonwealth Club. Put it that way. We have our own games. We don't invite everybody else. We just, we all that kind of stuff.
All right. Yeah, your exclusivity is waning, but that's all right. That's all right. So, and I come from a culture that had a monarchical structure for centuries as well. And then we had a cataclysmic event that did away with that, and did away with that for good. So different ways of looking at how a monarchy may be representative of a nation or of the people that it represents. I've always had a little bit of a fascination with it, right? So I come from Germany, the country of fairy tale poets. So Grimm's fairy tales known around the world. We've always dealt from childhood days on. We've dealt with the princes and princesses and the kings and queens and the witches and all the other evils. And there was always this, the fairy tale royalty aspect to it. And even though I grew up in a culture without notable nobility, it is still somewhat present in our media consumption in those non-royal societies. I don't know what it's like growing up in Australia or living in the Anglo world. Is the House of Windsor ever present?
It was ever present, and in fact, our national anthem was still "God Save the Queen" up until the 80s, when it was changed to "Advance Australia Fair." So I grew up going to events, ceremonies, and it was ubiquitous to the society that was basically what we identified ourselves as. And then it had a true impact. It had a real political impact in terms of the Queen's, through her, the Governor General, who was a representative of Australia a representative of the Queen in Australia, who actually did, on behalf of the Queen, dissolve Parliament and did away with the government in real time. Democratically elected government was actually shown the door, and through some, the result of political leverage from the opposite party. But it was just an unworkable, untenable situation where the Queen eventually just had to step in and say, "This is not going to work for me. We need to take action." That was a very telling touch point in Australian history, and it resulted in, I think, things like the changing of the anthem and a true look at our identity as a still part of the Commonwealth. But it also then culminated in an actual vote to take it to the people and say, is the royal family still relevant in our life? Is it something that we want to have ourselves, our identity attached to? And it was, not soundly beaten, but it was true at that time, at least when it was taken, that there was still that, there was certainly a very independent mindset for most Australians, but they still felt there was enough of a lineal heritage to be valued, that we should stay connected. And because, obviously we still, like that time, had the generation that fought in the war alongside their British counterparts and that kind of thing. So there was that we had played two sides of the coin. Very good friends in the Americans with their Republican mindset, and then also this kind of very traditional and heritage-driven connection. So I'm not sure that I'm not a special at this, but I think in the current setting, the Queen is actually still quite well respected, and so therefore, as an individual, her representation of the monarchy and its role in Australia or for Australians is quite positive. And then, of course, along came Harry and William. And William and Kate, of course, and they're extremely popular. They're mobbed by crowds. There is a very strong connection. Prince Charles went to school in Australia. Both his sons spent time in Australia. There's always a very warm connection between it. So I think for us Aussies, we find it very hard to kick those people to the curb and say you're not relevant, because you're kind of our mates.
I find that fascinating, though, that for this episode, I had to actually go through a list of monarchies and royal families that are still in full insignia. And a whole lot of them are in countries that are quite egalitarian, with a societal structure that is quite the opposite of hierarchical and pointed towards a single entity, which monarch actually means. Monarchia is Greek Latin meaning the rule of one, right? Of one individual. That's the tip of the top of the pyramid, right? So look at Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Belgium. Look at, well, even the UK, right? These are fairly egalitarian societies with well-established democratic principles, and still they hold on to almost fallen out of time structures that are kind of like the antidote to a democratic process. There is a symbolic figurehead or a family that resembles or represents one's culture, one's nation. For someone like me who grew up without that, that's kind of a conflict that's hard to resolve.
Yeah, no,
I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, it's a difficult. I haven't really been able to bring that to a head. When I'm working with people that are going to the UK, they kind of have this outward sense of this kind of sense of formality and hierarchy in the UK, and it still exists, I guess, for an older generation. There is that paternal or patrilineal type of influence in the culture. There used to be a whole house of government there called the House of Lords, which was purely not only the royal family was by lineage, but it was also you got to be a part of the government just because you were born into a certain family. Now,
Don't they still have the House of Lords in England? I thought it's still
it still exists, but it's not really a hierarchy. What do you call it? Hereditary type of body. So where you are born into a family, therefore you have certain rights just to enter it, whether you're smart enough to do it or not. That's I think that's been changed. So, but there, I think this, if you look through history, a lot of it is, as I said, patrilineal type of structures. So some of them where that is maintained to the utmost. Chinese, I love learning about Chinese history, and the emperors, they call them emperors, not queens and kings. Emperors with the basically the decree of gods to rule over the people. But what happens when a father dies and their son is only maybe an infant? Well, they still became the emperor.
No, they had a regent to do the business until they grew up, right?
Yeah, they have an empress dowager, which is obviously usually either the mother that still kind of is influential. So the empress dowager then becomes influential, but that's through the authority of the son. Whether it doesn't matter, even they can't kind of eat their own food, right? So it's just sort of fascinating human expression to give up power. And I guess if you look at some cultures, and maybe they're kind of towards the more tendency to be more certainty orientated, where such authority gives them the consistency and the sense of continuity that they need in their lives, so that they can they can turn up every day knowing it's exactly like it's going to be yesterday.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that is a common thread that you find in those, let's say, more modern, or modern is the wrong word, more societies that have developed into more democratic systems, like the ones that I mentioned earlier. Holding on to the tradition is something that creates this feeling of perpetuity, right? Of that this life goes on, and that there are constants in our lives despite the constant changes. There's something that doesn't change, and that means that the queen and the king, or whoever, whatever they are called, they're still there, and they're greeting us on every holiday, and they represent us when whatever reason we have, right? I find it interesting that, though, this is a very Eurocentric way of looking at it. Then you look around the world and you find monarchical structures, you find royalty that is still not only there for symbolic reasons, they actually govern. Look at the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. Look at many of the Arabic nations. The King of Morocco is still fairly, I mean, it's a constitutional monarchy, but without the king's yay or nay, there's nothing done, right? Look at King Rama in Thailand. Sure, there is a parliament, but hello, nobody will insult the royal house in Thailand. You'll get a prison sentence for that.
Right. You got a job.
So,
yeah.
I learned the kingdom of Eswati, formerly known as Swaziland, that is also still a absolute monarchy, right? So there are still these hereditary systems, whether the people are qualified for this or not, who are predisposed or groomed into the position of government and ruling, actually, maybe more than governing, actually some sort of arbitrary decision making, whether you like it or not, or whether you have a legal recourse or not. And so those are different types of monarchical structures in our day and age.
Yeah, I think for most Australians, for example, bringing it back to my culture, would bristle at the idea if they're ever told, why do you let the Queen rule over you? We wouldn't even look at it as somebody who's ruling over it. It's just, she's a nice old lady that kind of is wonderful, and is, she's a sweet lady. Yeah, she's a sweet lady, and goodness knows we wouldn't want to offend her. But then again, that's not a patrilineal. It was just by default, because her father didn't have any sons. She became the queen as the oldest. So, but then again, the importance of having a male, getting now kind of leading it to today's events, where Prince Philip, who is somebody who has been a consort, and I think that most political observers would agree that he has been very influential in the support of the Queen Elizabeth II in her reign. Somebody that she's always been very close to in terms of not only relationally, but also in terms of her ability to support his wife, give her counsel, give her direction, not that she had the ability, didn't have the ability to do it. But it is an interesting, and who knows what goes on behind the big steel doors of the palaces. But I think it's
a Netflix show called The Crown. It will tell you all about it. Oh, no.
That's right. And you have to practice. You have to practice your very best British, which of course Brent would probably do a better job than me. And he says Commonwealth realms are tied to the royal family through their constitution. The Crown is key part of government in the legal system, and that is true, right? So it's not just that we're keeping them around for fun. This is why in Australia we actually have to have a vote to either decide that we're going to maintain that system. And I think that because it is part of the constitution, the written document that says this is the way that the legal process takes place. So if you change the monarch, you've got to change the whole legal system. And it's not, and that's more than just changing a letterhead. And
right now, I mean, even though Prince Philip was not the King of England and he is not the sovereign, he was the Duke of Edinburgh, or some would say the Duke of Hazard, with some of his things that he did throughout his adventurous lifetime. But now that the Queen is in mourning, that means she won't be signing any laws into action, right? So government or the law-making process is in hiatus until that national hiatus of mourning is done. Now, I find all of this fascinating, and yet then I look at other Central European cultures or other cultures around the world, the one that I live in right here in the United States, who will follow royal stories with amusement and bewilderment, and yet would not want a single iota of it. And I grew up in Germany. We had our share of monarchy, and that ended abruptly with the end of World War I. And ever since then, neither the royal families or other noble families had any more political or fiduciary benefits any longer. And for us, this is like, okay, good. This is nice that's good fodder for the tabloid media. Great. And it makes for great television maybe, but please spare us. We don't need this for us. Right. So there's two ways of looking at it. I found it very fascinating because a good friend of mine growing up, and I would suspect that she's not watching this, but a good friend of mine I grew up with in high school. She was of noble descent, which we all knew because her name had a von in it. So that means of. That's the German word of something. So she had first name, von, last name. So that means everybody knew, okay, there was some royalty back then. And none of her family ever said the von syllable. They just said the last name. They really dropped the whole, even the slightest hint of nobility was dropped. They were so like common like everybody else. This was never even a thing until my friend and I went on a trip that meant we needed our passports, and we went abroad, and somehow our passports got mixed up, and I opened hers, and oh no, that's not mine, that's yours. And before I give it back, I look at her name in her passport, and it needed 3 lines. And I was like, Nikki, what is this? Oh, that's just my official name. That's my birth certificate name. And it said Princess something, 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 3 lines. Like, wow. Wait a second, you're Princess? Yeah. She said, yeah, according to my birth. Yeah, but who cares, right? Was never mentioned. I think only a handful of people know that she would qualify as a princess, but nobody cared, right? Right. So there is no woo-woo around it. There's no ceremonial stuff around it. It was just her birth name, but nobody cared, right? That's the exact opposite of keeping that monarchical royal tradition alive just for ceremonial purposes. Not in my culture.
You didn't get an upgrade to business class because of that? I would have thought that.
Nope. No, actually, we didn't fly. This was a car trip into a country where we still needed a passport, right? Yeah. No flying, but it was
no flying. Yeah.
But here's the funny thing, right? So the German royal family, the House of Hohenzollern, which was the royal family that governed Prussia and by extension then the German Empire, 1871 till 1918. that family still exists, right? There is still people with the last name Hohenzollern.
Yeah.
However, they have no more political clout. However, in those past 100 years, their properties were either annexed or put under government ownership or guardianship. Then they owned a lot of properties in what was East Germany for 40 years, so under communist rules. Now that country is gone with the reunification. Now the Hohenzollerns come back and say, wait a second, we still have claims on these lands or these buildings or these artworks, and let's fight that out in court because technically that's still our stuff. That's our family collection.
Yeah.
And there's a public debate about this. There's people in Germany who say maybe they have a legal case here and the court should hear that. I think a vast majority of Germans says, are you freaking nuts? Go back to your nice big mansion somewhere in the hills of so-and-so, but your days are over, right? This is now German collective property, and sit back down, be quiet, right? So that's a completely different approach to those who have names that meant something sometime.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at conceptually the idea of a royal family and a monarch in any setting, you don't think about people that get up and go to work every day and have to pull their pants on and do something every day as a, again, it seems like more ceremonial. By their very, you look back at the medieval periods, these people got their wealth by basically taxing the peasants and getting a share of everything that the other communities, the lower echelons of community, gave them. So, or they took off them, right? And so I can see where someone pushed back and say, well, you don't have rights. So the stuff that you got was given to you by our toil and labor anyway. So this doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to us as a community. I can see where that'd be different. But
and then their retort would be then, well, we in exchange we gave you protection and legal security, and when our troops then made sure that you could still do your farming because the other powers that were invading us, we kept them at bay, right?
Right.
That's what thing. Revolutions were made of, right?
Yeah. And of course we don't, and as you mentioned before, there's a really pretty story that kind of comes out of the whole pop culture that has existed for years and years and years, right? The story of and of course it was kind of, it's difficult now in contemporary times. That's why, but I mean the old story about the prince that saves the princess and all this kind of stuff, and it's it's a story of, I guess, exemplifying a potential for you to be a greater person, and if you're not, you've got someone to look up to, right? And so that's that story that we've always kind of got, this fairy tale. The fairy tale is a
role modeling. Yeah,
it's a role modeling, right? Yeah. So, and of course we can talk about, and we're the parents of girls, so we kind of bristle at the fact that our girls should ever be subservient to a prince that comes along and saves them. But it's
now what Patricia says here, I'm not sure if that is true, that Prince Philip was German by birth. I believe he's Greek by birth, but we need to look that up. Prince Philip was of the House of Glücksburg, the Danish royal family, which had also claims over the Greek thrones. I'm not sure, Patricia, if he was German by birth or not. I may have read that but Netflix is probably smarter than I am. Who knows?
Yeah, but it's a good. That's a difficult part, right? I mean, in terms of monarchies and perpetuating this authority, the Queen just couldn't go off and marry anybody, right?
So here we have a Brett. Ellison knows it. Ellison says, born in Corfu. There we go.
Born in Corfu. Yeah.
All right.
Greek. There you go. So, I mean, it's just so going outside
in celebration of.
No, this is great. Anyway, I think it's a great discussion. It's something that we could talk about for days and days. I think I find it fascinating. I mean, I just find it a fascination. That's why TV shows like The Crown and prefer documentaries, although even documentaries are written through the lens of the particular biases of the So there could be either for or against, and that kind of thing. But I think the idea of monarchies, and as I said, with the Chinese side of it, talking about the historical lineage of the different dynasties and how they were ruled, and the success or failures of such through the lens of their practices and things like this. It's not an easy answer. Some monarchies are a wonderful success, and give the communities and the people that they govern over, to for want of a better word, a sense of kind of continuity and succession, and then, but on the other side, that more kind of autonomous ability to rule and do bad things with that power is always there, right? And in a place like China, that has happened many, many times, right?
But I think that is how continuity can actually be a guide or a companion to a nation or a culture's metamorphosis. Let's look at Japan, right? The Tenno, the Japanese emperors, long for centuries warmongering absolute monarchs. With the end of World War II, Japan transforming itself into the country that it is today, and the Japanese emperor, the Tenno today, is the epitome of modesty and has a very subdued presence, and yet the people revere him as a symbolic figurehead, right? So how the role of monarchy changes in unison, in alignment with how the country's society changed over the last 100 years, right? I think that's a great example as well.
I think Alison says, I think I read this morning, that his mother was actually the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria.
Aren't they all related somehow? I mean, we talked about this before the program. If Philip was born in Greece, then the first Greek king after Greek independence from the Ottoman Empire was from the Bavarian house of royalty. My people, right?
So now we get to the truth, right? This is the reason why these Bavarians.
They didn't do well as kings of Greece. That was not a success story. But what I'm trying to say is, somehow all these European royal houses have some sort of relationship somewhere, somehow. That's
yeah, absolutely. Well, as Alison says, yes, Queen Victoria is the mother of many European royal families. She had quite an influence. Queen Victoria was very, very influential, not only not only from her power, but also her lineage, that's for sure. And Princess Alice, yeah. Well, this is great. We got lots of people interacting. This is fantastic. I mean, this is a great topic, and we've certainly got a lot to learn. There's a lot of people who have done great research, and we have done none of it. We've just come here we just saw the news. For me, I kind of, I have a personal connection to it. I feel a personal connection to this loss, because I think, wow, this is somebody who's been such a deep part of our culture for many, many years, and the family that came along with it. Caribbean people, right.
So hail to Queen Patricia. All right.
Queen, well, actually, yes. Miss Globalicious, Queen Globalicious. I almost said princess. I'm really below the station because, yes, there are many people here who have just commented that are very good teachers and mentors and friends of ours. And thank you so much for engaging in this great topic. It's just fun, we're not experts. We're always willing to learn. And probably when events like this happen, it might take you back to actually going, well, actually, this is a time where I could probably learn about the history of this guy, this man, his influence, and perhaps the resulting kind of contemporary setting that he's left us with, and his legacy, because it's been an impactful time. And as I say, with Queen Elizabeth II, who has been the longest serving monarch in the UK, it is going to be one that goes down in history and will be kind of researched and written about for probably generations beyond it. So absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy your kings and queens of your world, whoever that may be. And we'll see you again fresh and restored after the weekend with yet another episode of the #1 show about the culture of business and the business of culture. How's that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.